He's been building global teams and he's been transforming global organizations for over 25 years. I'd love to welcome George Nazi to LeadersIn. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. George, if we can just start with personal success. One thing that has been common throughout your career is that whatever organization you're in, you've risen to the top, right? So what are some of the personal attributes that you have has enabled you to get to the top? Is it the hardest working, the smartest? What do you think it is?
No, I would say actually I enjoy what I do. So, where I go in and the places I work in, I make sure what I'm doing is something that's enjoyable. I make sure people that are around me are enjoying it. And I like to work in a smarter way. So I always look at, there must be another way that we can do this. Somebody must have a better idea. So I include as much as possible everybody's ideas in order to accelerate the move we want to go to. So I usually say, okay, here's what I've learned before. For the last 10, 15 years, in these situations, I have encountered these. Anybody has a better idea? If not, we proceed. If yes, then I'll adapt the idea and I move.
So as the boss, you don't always have to have all the ideas. You need to generate it. Yeah, absolutely.
I believe always surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, and don't have fear in making a decision. Making a decision is better than making no decision, even if the decision is wrong. Just make it, and be agile in recovering fast and moving. So, if in doubt, just make the decision and go. If we're wrong, we're going to learn from it and we're going to move. And I think also that approach helps you, continuously moving at a pace and momentum. As long as we're enjoying what we're doing collectively, we're including all the ideas and we're moving at that pace, I think it will happen,
Do you think that, speed and agility, as you said, in your keynote you just gave then, you were very agile. The speaker before you, didn't give you very much time, you were agile, you made it fluid. So agility is one of those skills that we all must master at this day and age, right, as well as speed?
Yeah, I fundamentally believe in agility, fundamentally. I have done, and I come from the classical program management. I've done programs in the past where I used to have, these long-term program management, let's do a waterfall, and then I realized there is no plan that go 100% to plan. So if you already understand this and you already know this, then why not from the beginning, instead of spending so much time on the planning, directionally know 70-80% where you're gonna go, how I'm gonna do it, and then start. The point is start, fail fast, recover, and move.
Yeah, that's right. I love it because on Facebook walls, for example, Mark Zuckerberg's put posters all around the place saying better done than perfect. Yes. Get it out there, iterate in the marketplace.
Absolutely.
Very, very smart. George, a lot of people talk about work-life balance. Do you think in order to get to the very top, to get to the C-suite, do you think that life from the work-life balance does have to go out the window somewhat?
Doesn't have to go out of the window, but there is a lot of work. You end up, you do get sucked into it. Again, if you enjoy it, you're passionate about it, you are going to spend time. But it's important, it's very important that you do spend quality time with the family. And it's very important that you have that understanding with the family and you have agreed, here's the certain things, and do not cross the line. Do not sacrifice the family for work. But, the nature of that business, and if you like it, you'll end up spending a lot of time in it.
You talked about enjoyment a lot today, and in the research we've done on you, a guy called G. Rittenhouse from Cisco once wrote, he tackled our largest transformational challenges, customer focus and quality, with incredible energy and precision. That word energy seems to be, Tom Peters, we interviewed a guy called, Tom Peters, the US management guru, and he said every successful company, every successful team, and every successful project runs on one thing, and that's energy. It's the leader's job to be the energy source that others feed on. So it seems to me, it's very important to love what you do.
Absolutely. I believe people need to be passionate about what they're doing. And it's important that we place the people for where their passion is so that they can succeed in what they're doing. Because if people enjoy it, they love it, they're not anymore worried about the negativity of it, and they will want to accelerate at the pace, especially if you give them the air cover of failing fast and recover. So don't worry, even if you make a mistake, I am here, I'll take the blunt. As long as you learn from it and we move forward. So, people that enjoy it absolutely will have that passion, that belief, and that drive, and they'll go forward.
That's it, exactly. Okay, and you talk about leadership versus management there, and some people think that you've got Jane over here as a leader and Jim over here as a manager, but the executives need to have a combination of both. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. My view is you do not separate the two. There are times for management, there are times for leadership, and many times you're doing both at the same time. It doesn't mean that this guy is a manager, this guy is a leader. Absolutely not. No. I use the terminology just to explain.
That's exactly right. So talking back about leadership, what would you say is the best piece of leadership advice you've received?
Interesting. The best piece of advice I received was actually 17 years ago. I was doing a 360 feedback. And one of my colleagues, and I discovered that later, because it was such a profound statement that he wrote to me. He said, George, slow down for the benefit of the team. So, I'm moving fast as we're describing, and then when I read it, and he wasn't shy to put his name, even though it's supposed to be a confidential 360. So I went to him and said, Mike, why did you write this? I don't understand. And he said, it's like in a football team. If you are the best player, and you're all the way in the front of the pitch and everybody's behind, you might score one goal, but rest assured, that will be the only goal that you will strike. If you don't operate as a team and in the team dynamic and bring people with you, there is no way you'll consistently then hit the mark.
Right.
And that was so profound about, oh wow, he's right. Sometimes you think about, I want to be competitive, I want to proceed, it's all about me, and that is not the case.
Right, exactly. I think it's much, much better to hear slow down than speed up, particularly from a leadership. That's fantastic. But one of the things you just mentioned there is you're quite open about the fact that, leaders, even the greatest leaders, have strengths and weaknesses, and you need to be able to take feedback. And one of the things I've noticed is your authenticity. You've talked about authenticity in the past, and you talked about vulnerability. How important do you think those things are in leadership?
So I believe vulnerability is, that's very important in what I call vulnerability-based trust. Right. So let me talk about this, because if there is one leadership book that I would recommend to anybody, and since 2003 I've been doing it, it's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Okay. And even though it's not really a leadership team, it's how do you bring a team together. And the basis of building a team is all about trust. And there are 5 components to it. Once you have trust, and when I say trust, it's vulnerability-based trust. So if I am strong here and weak here, I need to be comfortable to tell you, I'm not strong here. Yeah. This is my strength, this is my weakness. Because if then you are strong in this element, cover me when I am playing in this domain. So I cannot always be a striker or a goalie. I'm good at defense. Don't put me as a striker, please. You're the striker, be the striker. So that part, if we're comfortable in saying this is our vulnerability, look, you're giving me this, that I cannot do. This I can do. That starts building the foundation of the relationship that then I can trust. If I pass the ball to you, you are going to take it forward because you're a striker. If somebody's going to come in, I'm a defender, I know what position I'm going to hold. That is very, very fundamental. Once you have that layer, then you can start talking about fear of conflict. Fear of conflict means now that I can trust and I trust you, then I can tell you what I believe is not right or right without destroying you. So I can openly say, you know what, that behavior I didn't like, here I was hurt, that offended me, instead of smiling and moving away. So the second layer is when you build that team dynamics around fear of conflict. Yeah. Then you look at responsibility, then you look at accountability, and finally you look at the results. Right. So you have to go through all of these in building a team dynamics while being agile, moving fast, making sure mistakes you're recovering, but that to me becomes the core foundation.
Yeah, and you talked about strengths and weaknesses there as well. I mean, we all need to be honest, the fact that we all have strengths and weaknesses.
Absolutely. Nobody's born perfect.
Yeah. Moving on to corporate leadership now, and obviously you've ran companies, you've had teams of over 40,000, huge enterprises. One of your businesses, you're rolling out projects across 170 countries, so you know a thing about global communication as well. But one thing that people always talk about is a gap between strategy and execution. And we all know that execution is important, otherwise you don't get things done. But we found a quote here saying, a recognized technology leader, this is talking about you, a recognized technology leader known for blending strategic vision and operational execution to achieve business goals. So how do you actually make sure you've got the strategy at the top and every single entity of that organization is executing that strategy?
So I would say 2 things. The first one is, I am the type of leader, manager, person that believes you cannot really separate strategy from the execution. Many CEOs think, strategy is this, wild vision, and then later we will get to it. I believe you have to bridge that gap. Whatever you cannot decide that as a strategy, it has to have certain legs that allows you then to take it from that strategy to the execution without being narrow-minded. So indeed, you can be very open-minded about it, set the vision of what it is, but have the capability that later then you can run in what's underneath it to execute on it. Two, you do need to have the culture behind you to allow you to drive to that. You have to drive that cultural shift and changes based on these capabilities to be able to take it from that strategy to that execution, and people are willing to go with you in order to do this.
Got you. Fantastic. Excellent. And talk about acquisitions. You know, you've done a lot of acquisitions and you talked about culture just then. So how do you make sure, I mean, companies that are on the acquisition path, very often you hear of companies that have been acquired, you know, the founder leaves, the acquisition goes south. If you look at Bebo that's bought by AOL for 850 million, within a few years the founder bought it back for 1 million. So how do you make sure that your acquisition actually works both culturally and as an entity?
I think here, and we have done, you know, in my past we've done many acquisitions. In one company we did 67 acquisitions. Here it really depends what you're acquiring. If you're, and again, you know, just to have a very open conversation or ruthless conversation, if you're acquiring just the assets, then you are not interested then in some of that leadership, and that means you can go in and you just say, plug these in. You might interview the people, but then you're only looking at the asset base in order to drive this. But sometimes you're acquiring actually the leadership, you're acquiring the talent, and that's what you're looking for rather than the assets. And that becomes very important to ring fence and put them in the top so that they can cascade that culture that you are trying to get. So it depends what is it you're trying to get, and that needs to be part of your integration strategy. You know, it's always, you know, some companies now tried to be an integration of equal. So they acquired and tried to do integration of equal in the vendor industry. You know, 2 or 3 of them failed. So now when they did the last acquisition, said, no, we're going to take over. It's going to be our way or not the other way. And, you know, 80% of the top team is going to be from the old one because from their lessons learned. So everybody has a different approach on how to do the integration of the culture or the assets.
Yeah, I mean, talk about integration there. You know, is values exceptionally important that you've got? I mean, I know that, for example, you're one of the you know, masters at making sure organizations are customer focused. You've led global initiatives on customer facing. So, you know, is that important? And how do you make sure, this is probably a separate question, but how do you make sure that organizations and entity, whether they're newly acquired or the parent company, are genuinely, they don't just talk about it, they are genuinely customer orientated?
Yes. That requires a little bit deeper conversations with the leadership team around their beliefs, around their values. What is it really they're aspiring and why? What is their motivation for improving the business? Is improving the business because they're only you know, looking at just the bottom line numbers and squeezing, or are they really looking at it from a customer experience, and that customer experience is going to get me more revenue, so I'm going to improve the numbers? It's how do they look about, how do they take the progression path? Right. And that starts telling you what is the mindset. 2, even if they have the different mindset, you should try to win them over by saying, look, it's customer experience that matters, this is why it matters, explain, have that dialogue. But if you find there's no way they're going to accept it because their heritage is different, you know, then you probably have to part ways with.
We talked about innovation just then, and a lot of people within organizations think that it's the customer's job to do the innovations. And I know obviously there's the Kaizen innovation, the continuous improvement, and then there's the big disruptive innovation, the really big ideas. Whose job is it to have those big ideas?
I think actually it's a combination, or it could be either. It could be coming from the customer, and I also believe as part of improving the service, you can do co-location, collaboration with the client in order to drive a lot of the innovation ideas. So you get it from the client in order to provide that service. You can start it as a pilot, iterate on it and improve. 2, if you're in the software business and you expose these APIs and suddenly the client is innovating on top of your platform, and then you're realizing this is a reference and then I can launch and increase, again coming from the client. Or 3, then from within your organization, that you have a team that's always looking towards the future and the trends and says, here's different things that we could do, allow us to kind of pilot, and again, back to the fail fast and recover, see if there's something that we can come up with that would allow us to extrapolate, not just as Kaizen, but even as a breakthrough. You know, I use the idea of the ice harvesting versus refrigerators. Can you skip a generation of ideas and say, I'll land here, let us try it once, let us try it 3 times, let us then scale it, and that becomes operational.
Interesting. So Because you mentioned right at the beginning of this interview that you don't think you yourself just have to come up with the ideas, you hire great people to come up with ideas as well. But it seems like do you allow people specifically time to do strategic thinking? I mean, to actually have time to think? Because very often you just end up just being busy what you do, that you need to take a step back and actually think about.
So, as I said before, first of all, I always hire people that are smarter than me around me, which, automatically forces me to listen to them, automatically gives that freedom for each of them to come up with ideas, and there's that sharing. So there's always time to come up with better ideas, brighter ideas, and also depending on the pace, many times you might think, we don't have the time, we cannot. No, actually try it. Let's actually, we could try it, and that could be a breakthrough for us. Next thing, that becomes the path that we will take. So as long as you always have that mindset of, I am willing to learn, I am willing to try it, and I am a little bit agile and flexible, as long as I'm delivering the results, the corporation and the clients are happy, it allows you to zigzag through and probably break through many things.
Yeah, brilliant. We're hearing next door just about the fact that 5 years ago nobody would have a tablet. Now 95% of people have got tablets. It's ubiquity, and things do come very fast over the horizon. So how as an organisation can you identify what is coming up? Presumably it's a good thing to come up with those ideas and concepts yourself. So positioning your organisation for future trends. I mean, how can...
It's funny because this is what my wife asks me. How do you sometimes foresee what's going to happen in the next 3 to 4 years? I think it's really by looking at and always staying crisp on what is really happening as a trend in the industry. What is Google doing? What is Facebook doing? What is the concept of driverless cars going to do to us? And what kind of capabilities these driverless cars will have with an Uber-like, some sort of a statistical capacity? Then is it possible that we don't need to own cars? That actually these cars that will come to my house, I will use it for half an hour, next thing it will go somewhere else, even if I specify it's a Mercedes or BMW, but I will never own it. That means instead of paying CapEx, I'm paying an OpEx model, and that means there's a lot of capabilities I will do. So suddenly you're already thinking, there's a business model here that I can always extrapolate. I don't have to have a car, and if I don't have a car, somebody will take my kids and my family, very secure, they're already connected. So you have to stay a little bit sharp, and two, accept learning. I mean, if you're continuously reading and learning and absorbing, it's all around us.
Yeah. It's interesting, because Ronan Dunn, the CEO of O2, said that he's constantly paranoid, and even Bill Gates from Microsoft said that he has sleepless nights because some whiz kid's going to come up with a great idea in a garage that's going to totally disrupt his entire business. And so being paranoid, always thinking, what if? Yes. It sounds like that's a... George, I've got 2 final questions for you. Okay. So just number one, I know that you set up a consulting business over in the US, and one of the things you were offering your clients over there was basically about cost reduction, and obviously that's a brilliant way to increase profits. But not many people are trained on negotiation. Not many people are great at procurement. So what are 1 or 2 of the key things you'd say to an organisation to make sure they drive their costs down?
I would say, look, now we go to the managerial aspect. Let's look at the end-to-end process. Is there a way? So let's define how do you things as a baseline? How do you do things step by step as a baseline? How can you optimize that baseline? Do you have that data that supports that baseline? And many times, that data that supports that baseline does not exist. And where you have that gap is where the extra cost is. So if you can optimize the way you do things to find where that lost data is, correct it, and take the cost out. Because and this happens because most organizations are moving very fast. So they forget that, 80% I'm correct, 20% I'm wrong, I'll continue, 80%. And then you're going and you're banking. And if you use a scientific approach like a Pareto, irreversible corrective actions, I will optimize, automate, and move forward, then you'll always find ways to take the cost out.
I'm going to finish with just one, put you on a spot if we can, just right at the end here, George. What would you say are 1 or 2 of the key things that define a world-class organization versus a world average organization?
I think a world-class organization is an organization that have a motivated workforce. Yeah. And motivated workforce comes from people that are passionate, believe in what they're doing, and are very happy in what they're doing.
It's a perfect note to end. George, I just want to say, on behalf of everyone watching at LeadersIn, thank you so much for your time, sir. We've been honoured.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
Thank you.